So at this point we only have a little bit of work left to do. We just need to, within the feed post component, make it possible to like, comment, and save a given post. Now we have all of the mutations for that written out, but what's different about this is that we're going to need to update the cache since we're not working with a subscription as compared to a query. For a query, we're going to need to update the cache manually to be able to see when we like it, one like, to be able to see our comment immediately, etc. So let's head over to the feed post, and we can go ahead and if we want, up at the top, we can import all of the mutations that we need from one level, or actually 2 levels up, into GraphQL/mutations. We're going to need save post, unsave post, like post, unlike post, as well as create comment. And we're also going to need the get feed query from 2 levels up, GraphQL queries. And while we're at it, we might as well import use mutation. So we'll begin with liking and unliking a post. So we'll head down to the like button. First we have to pass down some props to it. We'll need to pass down likes, post ID, which is equal to ID, and then the author ID, which is equal to user.id. Then we'll destructure all of that. Likes, post ID, author ID. We could take a lot of the code that we're going to be writing here from the post component if we like. First, we're going to take likes and iterate over it with sum, destructure user ID in the params, and see if that's equal to the current user ID. So we will read from user context in order to grab current user ID. And we're also going to need feed IDs while we're at it. So we'll pass the result of this operation to, well, first we'll set it equal to a variable is already liked, and then we'll pass what's stored there to the initial value for liked. Next, we're going to use mutation for both like post and unlike post. To get both of those mutate functions, and we'll make the variables object composed of post ID, user ID set to current user ID, and the profile ID equal to author ID. So next we will remove the console log and handle like, and here call like post with its variables, and unlike will remove the log and call unlike post with its variables. Now for each of these we're going to need to use an additional property, an additional function, update, and we're going to use another function, handle update, to take care of that. So we'll pass handle update, we'll reference handle update here for like post, and then also for update, that'll be handle update and unlike post too. So for updating the cache, and the first argument is going to be the cache, and the second is going to be the result of performing this mutation. But if we take a look at our mutation now for like post, we'll see we're just returning, with insert likes, we're just returning affected rows. Here instead, it would be better to return underscore underscore type name, because we're deferring action for updating the cache to this single function. So we'll see why in just a second. We want to see what mutation is being performed so we can see how to update the cache appropriately. So if we're handling a like, we want the count for likes to be incremented by 1. For unlike, we want it to be decremented by 1. So first, we know the process of updating the cache is to read from it. So we want to say cache.read query, and we'll select the query, which in this case is the get feed query. And then we need to provide any variables that it had. Now we don't need to include the last timestamp. All we need to include here is the limit, which was 2, and also the feed IDs. And then we're going to get back our data. Now let's console log this. Let's console log result. And we'll grab both result and data here. So let's save everything and try liking one of our posts. And again, we're reading from the get feed query because that's how we're getting each individual feed post, just to be clear. If we try liking it, we're going to get result. The result is going to have a property data, and within it we're going to have insert likes with the type name of likes mutation response. So that's how we can see that this is a likes mutation. We see that there's insert likes, and if we unlike it, what are we going to get for a result? Result data is going to be delete likes. So how are we going to update the data? Well, we're first going to take the type name, and that's going to come from result. We'll put this in a variable of the same name, result.data.insert likes. And since this could be delete likes, we'll add a question mark here since that's optional, __ type name. So if the type name is equal to, and we can copy this, likes mutation response, that string, if it's equal to that, then the count, meaning the number that we should add back to the query, that we should write to the query, should be 1. Otherwise, if it's not, it should be -1, assuming that the alternate situation is going to be delete likes. So now, taking a look at our data, what are we going to do? Well, the path to it is data, posts, and for each one of these, we're going to need to go in and update the likes aggregate. So we're going to need to go down to likes aggregate, and increment the count by 1. That is if we're liking a post, but if we're not, it's going to be, we're going to add -1, which is the same as subtracting 1. So we're going to say data.post.map. We're going to iterate over each post, and we're going to return the object. I'll do an implicit return by surrounding it in parentheses. For this, we're going to first spread in all of the post values. Then we want to update the likes aggregate. We'll select that. We want to spread in here post.likes aggregate. And the reason we have to keep spreading in these different objects or these other properties here on post.likes aggregate or post is because we need to include all of these different type names. Not only do we need to include all these fields when we update the cache, but we need to include the type names associated with each one. Then within likes aggregate, we'll select aggregate, and then we'll spread in post.likes_aggregate.aggregate. And then finally, the count is going to be post.likes_aggregate.aggregate.count plus the count that we calculated. That's it. So we're going to store the return value, the new array, in a variable called posts, and then finally we're going to write back to the cache with cache.write query, and we're going to write back to the query get feed with the data object that contains the property posts. So let's try this. We'll save, and when we try to like a post, we should see the count immediately increment or decrement according to what mutation that we're performing. So let's try liking this post. We see 1 like immediately, and if we remove it, we see 0 likes, just like we would want. So now let's move on to the Save button. So let's go up to where we're displaying that component and pass down all the appropriate props. we're going to need saved posts. Saved posts, and camel case is going to be set to saved posts in snake case. Post ID is again just ID. So we'll then go down to the component itself and grab both of those props, destructure them, post ID, saved posts, and again we're going to need to grab read from context, just in this case the current user ID, and here we'll take saved post, iterate over it with some, destructure the parameters, grab user ID, in the return see if user ID is equal to the current user ID. If so, we'll say it's already been saved, put that value in the initial state of saved, and then let's create our two mutations, save post and unsaved post. We'll call this remove post. The second mutate function will create our variables object. And that's going to be composed of just the post ID from props and the user ID set to current user ID. Then for handle save, we'll remove the log. Then call save post with variables, and the same for handle remove. Well, in this case, remove post with variables. So here we don't need to update the cache. We're going to see the changes immediately in the UI. Ultimately, once we go to our profile page, we'll see the changes. So if we were to save this, we can just confirm that it works by looking at the Save tab. And then finally, for comment, we're just going to need to pass through the post ID here. So add post ID is set to ID. Destructure post ID. From context, we're going to grab current user ID and feed IDs. So we're going to need to also get the create comment mutation. Get the mutate function for that. Create comment. Then we're going to make another function. The first one's going to be called handle add comment, and this is going to be performed when we click on the button. So on click, handle add comment. What we'll do here is collect all the variables. Those are content from state, post ID from props, and user ID from context, current user ID. Then we'll call create comment. We'll pass in variables, and then for update, we'll make another handle update function. We'll make that above. Again, we're going to get cache and result passed to this, to the function. For variables, this is what we're going to need the feed IDs for. And we'll again need to provide limit to. For the data that we get back, we're going to need to read the query. Our query is going to be get feed variables that object. So we'll get back our data. And once again, let's console log the result and data to see how we're going to need to update this. And here to update the get feed query, we want to show the new comment here at the very bottom. just to show what this looks like with a couple of comments. I'll just say 1, 2, and then if we go back to our feed and refresh, we'll see 2 of the comments here, and it looks like I made a mistake. Instead of getting the content in our feed post, it looks like we're not at the moment. So let me look at queries and go to get feed. Are we getting the content for the comments? We are, but it's not being displayed here, so maybe I made a typo. So let me go up, and yeah, I spelled content wrong, so that's why we can't see it. It's an important change that we need to make. So once it's displayed appropriately, we should see the 2 last comments. We're only fetching 2 of them here. Okay, so when we want to update the cache, what do we need to return? We need to actually return some data from this mutation to provide it to our function, the handle update function here. Scroll down, back down to comment. Here in result, we need to get all of the data necessary to update the cache. What is that going to be? Well, we're going to need the ID, we're going to need the username, and we're going to need the content. So let's head to our mutations, and here for create comment, we want to add returning. We need to add this returning field, and we're going to need ID. We'll also need created at. Then for the user, we'll need to grab the username. And I believe also we need to, for this to correctly resolve, we need to return its fields of post ID and user ID. Oh, and of course the content. So with all of that, we should have everything that we need to add this new comment, combine the results and the data, and write back to the query. So let's try adding a new comment here with the fields that we're returning. So we'll just say last. And then if we look at result, insert comments, returning, we get everything right here, just like we'd need, and we need to add it back to data posts. And we need to find the appropriate post to update. So that's the steps necessary to write back to our query. So first we want to get a reference to our comment, and that's going to come from result.data.insert comments, returning, and then the 0th element. So I'm going to highlight this or put my cursor over it and just copy the property path, and that's going to be our old comment. Now to make our new comment, we're going to need to spread in the old comment and then provide this user property. It's an object, and we spread in old comment.user. This is just to copy our entire object here. We want to perform this update as immutably as possible, so we're not overwriting any data since we're using a lot of reference types here. So we're going to use data.post.map, and then for each post we're going to open up a set of curly braces, and first of all we're going to make our new post. So we're going to take this new comment that we created and update both the comments aggregate. If we look at posts, you'll see that we have comments aggregate as a field. We want to update the count, and then we want to update the comments array. So once again, we need to remember to spread in the previous post values. For comments, it's going to be a new array consisting of the old post.comments, and then we'll append the new comment to the end. Then for comments aggregate, we're going to spread in post post.comments aggregate. Then for aggregate, spread in post.comments aggregate. And for count, we'll take post comments aggregate.aggregate.count plus 1. So take a second to look over that. I know it seems a bit tedious, but it's important to get right. And what we want to return here is we want to return whether post.id is equal to post ID that we're getting from props. If that's the case, if the post is the one that we want to update, then we want to return the new post. Otherwise, we want to return the existing post, the old post. And that's it. Again, we're going to want to put the result of this, the new array that's created, in a variable called posts. And then we're going to write the query back to the getFeed query with our new data object consisting of just that post property. And then finally here we can set content to just an empty string to clear out the comment input. So it's a lot of steps, but let's give this a shot. We're going to try adding a comment. So we're going to say fourth comment here, and we should see the count for view all 3 comments. We should see that increment to 4, and then we should see fourth comment at the bottom. And it looks like we're missing a field profile image in this area. So for missing field profile image, let me just try adding that to, it looks like for, get feed, we had profile image and we didn't really need that. So that's why we had that discrepancy, it looks like. So just remove profile image from get feed, where we're requesting that in comments. We don't need that. We did for the get post subscription, but we aren't showing the avatar here on the far left side. So now let's try doing another one. Hopefully we see the count increment and we see our new comment, and we do. Good. And we can add another if we want, and that'll be appended to the end. So at this point, I believe we're all done with the functionality of our app. We've got everything working like we want. We can browse around and make sure that that's the case. But to me, this looks pretty good. Great work making it to this point. It was a ton of work that we put into this. But I want to show you just a few more tricks to making our app even better, even more reliable, and to cleaning things up to show you how to clean things up a little bit right before we do a final deploy. So there's one thing I want to do first, and that's check to make sure we don't have any data. We're not using any data here that we don't need to. I'm just getting some warnings in different places telling me I'm using get default user, so I want to make sure I'm not using that anymore, the default data. We can get rid of that, and if you want, you can get rid of the UUID, this UUID package in package.json. You can also remove your data.js file if you want, since we're not using any more dummy data. Make sure that you remove every instance, or at least comment out every instance of get default user and all of the other references, to default post, get default post, default notifications, etc. So that's one small step. Another step I'd recommend you check out, because we've, at this point, for many of our queries in particular, reused the same fields. One other thing to look into is using what are known as GraphQL fragments. So with fragments, the benefit of it is that we can reuse the same fields just with a simple variable. So remember here for get more posts from user that we are using all of these fields that were used for showing our grid post, all these things are for a grid post, and if we search for all of this, we use this for a couple of queries. And the same also applies for, suggest users. The suggest users query, we also used it in our search users query. So instead of having to write out all of the same fields time and again for different queries, what we can do, especially after we've written everything and we know all of the fields that these accept, we can write fragments to simplify things. And if there was another query that we had to write in the future, we could just easily use a reference to a variable, a fragment, in order to spread all of these different fields in. So for something like this, let's start simple. Let's start with this. We might want to call this set of fields our user fields. So how would we create a fragment for that? Well, we could simply go to our GraphQL folder and make a new file called fragments. Fragments.js. And up at the top, we're just going to need GQL from Apollo Boost. So as I mentioned, we wanted to make one called user fields. So we can export const user fields. And I like prefixing mine with the name of, with the type of data we're working with, or maybe it's some component, and then appending fields to the very end of it. And we can set that to GQL just like we were writing a query, but instead we're writing a fragment. So we need to use the fragment keyword at the beginning of it. So we need to say that this is a fragment of the same name, user fields, but it's going to be on a certain data type. We always need to declare what data type this is. So since this is on the data type of users on the users table to get the fields, we're going to say fragment user fields on users. And then we can grab all of the data here, copy all of that, and paste it right in. So now we have our first fragment, and to use it here in queries, we can remove all of the fragments, all of the fields that were previously in search users in this case, and we can just spread in user fields. And we spell it exactly like we named it, name the variable, and then at the very end, we can use the power of this tag template literal GQL just to interpolate with the $sign and curly brace syntax user fields and make sure to import that. So where we see it here in search users, we can also do the same in suggest users. Remove all the fields, spread in user fields, and at the very end, after the closing curly brace, we interpolate user fields, the name of that variable. And we can test and see that this works by going to any place where we're suggesting users or by searching for a user. So if we search for a user again, it takes a second, but we'll see that it shows up just fine. And then the same for suggesting users, and that is going to be right here on the right hand side and down here too. And the next one that we can do is for our grid post. Remember the grid post fields that we just took a look at, where it included, the ID and the media and the likes aggregate and comments aggregate. You can see it here in get user profile. So it doesn't even have to be all of the fields. You don't have to use a fragment for all the fields. You can just use it for subfields too. So let's grab all of this and see in how many different places it's used. It might be a little bit hard to find, but I'll just search manually. But anyway, we're going to call this, let's just go ahead and create the fragment. We'll export const grid post fields. That's the component it's going to be used in, so that's what we'll call it. It's equal to GQL. The fragment is going to have the same exact name, grid post fields, and we have to think about what data type we're working with. this is going to be on post, the post data type, the post table really. And we can paste in everything that we copied. We can use it anywhere that we find all of these fields that are going to be used for a grid post area. So we can use it here, grid post fields, and this is in get user profile, spread that in, and then import grid post fields, that variable down at the bottom. Let me just manually import it. And then elsewhere in that query here, for where post is a subfield of saved posts, we can spread that in there as well. And let's look elsewhere. Scroll down. And for explore posts, we'll use it there. Grid post fields. Then get more posts from user. So you can see how much this simplifies our code, so we don't have to read through every single field when we revisit a query. And I believe that's it. So we'll save. So we can check each one of those components. We can go to our profile. We still see we have our grid posts there. For the explore page, they're still there too. And then for an individual post, when we go to the post page, refresh, and let me find one user that has multiple posts at least, or I'll just add one temporarily. For a user that has multiple posts, if we go to one of them and refresh, we'll see, yeah, our grid post still works at the very bottom too. Great. Now, one thing that's been pretty annoying throughout the course of making our application is when, say, a query or something fails because maybe we wrote something wrong, like with our feed. If I misspelled ID here, it's just going to break our application. And we obviously don't want that. Hopefully we prevent all foreseeable errors before we deploy, but we don't want this ugly error. What's going to happen really is, of course, the user in production isn't going to see something like this. Not that they could make sense of it anyway, but they're just going to see a blank screen, and we really don't want that. So a good way to prevent this behavior, just so that they don't see nothing, so that they see that there's something wrong, is it's a good idea to add an error boundary. And this is basically just going to take care of catching an error and showing them something else other than just nothing when something about the app fails. And then you can go back and fix the error at your leisure. So the way that we're going to fix this is by heading to index, and we're actually going to use a class component for the first time in making this app. We're going to make a class component that's called error boundary. The reason we have to make a class component is we don't yet have the same exact lifecycle hooks as, they haven't been converted to React hooks quite yet to be able to catch our errors, but this is the standard approach to catching errors with an error boundary for at least a class component. So it's just going to consist of a piece of state, which we'll call has error, and by default it'll be false. We're going to add a couple of lifecycle methods, one called component did catch, which is going to tell us information about our error, and it has a couple of values that are passed to it, error and info. We can pass both of those to a console error, then info as the second argument. And then to be able to actually update, my mistake, I haven't written a method in a while, so I need to pass console error into the function body. And then to actually update the state when there is an app breaking error, we need to add a static method called getDerived state from error. And this is going to be responsible for updating state. And to do that for a static method, all we have to do is just return. We don't have to call setState. We can just return has error true. Now, this is going to update the state, but we still need to perform a check when the state, this.state.hasError is true. What are we going to show? Well, first we need to add our render function, and within that we can add our condition and say if this.state.hasError, if we have an error, huge error of some sort, let's just return something simple. We can just return a typography component, which we'll import, where the component is an h1 and a variant h6. If we wanted to, we could get more specific error from component did catch and supply that to state to be able to pass information to the user about what went wrong. But for right now, we're just going to use this typography, which will align to center, and we're just going to say, oops, something went wrong. And otherwise, we're going to pass through children. So this boundary is gonna wrap our entire component tree. If we don't have a huge error, we're just gonna say return this.props.children. And this is gonna need to be in render. So that's gonna wrap Apollo provider, error boundary is gonna wrap Apollo provider, and everything else, it's gonna accept everything as children. So now, I don't know if I'll break my query once again. I'll save this, and instead of seeing immediately our stack trace, we'll see that, and we won't see, this is what the development server is showing us, the type error and how to fix it, but for other users, they're going to see that screen that you saw. It just says, oops, something went wrong. So that's something. So at this point, I believe we're in a good position to deploy. If you have any console logs, you might want to remove them. You might want to comment them out. I've commented out a lot of stuff. Feel free to remove my comments if you like, if you're going off of the code that's attached to any one of these lectures. At this point, we can save everything, and we can, commit to Git. If you're using Git to keep track of your files, we'll make sure there's nothing showing up in our console, and don't worry if you're seeing this warning about component will mount. You don't need to run the code here. It's due to some package having outdated code. The development server is just going to continuously warn you about it. So right now we can end our development server, we can switch to another one, and we can run our deploy script. We've already deployed this before, so we can just run npm run deploy. So hopefully at the end you see ready and everything was deployed. So I'm just going to copy this and take a look at what we have in the browser. Copy this lower alias actually, and I'm going to try to log in. So you might be getting this error, this domain is not authorized to run this operation, and we get precise instructions on how to change that. So let's head over there, and we need to add it to the OAuth redirects domains list in the Firebase console. Go to auth section, then the sign in method tab. So this, I believe, is pretty straightforward. We'll go into our console, authentication, go to sign in method. We need to go down to the bottom. Yeah, here. We need to go down to the bottom and add a domain. So this is going to be the domain that we deployed to. I believe this will work now. Let's give this a shot. Let me refresh and try this again. Okay, good. It just has to recognize it as an actual domain, and we can see it looks just like we would expect. And we can like things and add comments. And we can unfollow users. And we can have new notifications here. Search for users. Explore new stuff. And just looking at these posts, I believe I made a small error with the explore post query for where it should actually be where the user ID is not in following IDs. And I actually think I want to change this because we're getting our own post in Explore. We want to change this to, we want the user ID to be not in feed IDs because we know that feed IDs includes our own ID. So let's change the variable name here, feed IDs. Make sure not to have two $signs for each variable. That sometimes screws me up when I do autocomplete. So user ID is not in feed IDs, and then back where we're calling explore posts, let's actually get feed IDs from context and provide that as the variable. So of course you can run this and test it in development, but I'm just going to go ahead and run the deploy script again. So okay, once that's redeployed, let's refresh and make sure we see some different posts from users that we're not following, and perfect, we do. So tremendous work in finishing this application. You've really done a huge job in coming to this point. So few people actually make it to the end of these courses, especially ones that are as long and as grueling as this. I'm sure you learned a lot along the way and got a lot of valuable practice in building all of this. I'm sure, as we all do, we run into hitches along the way, but I really hope the experience has been valuable for you, and definitely make sure to show this off, show this to your friends, your family, but make sure to put this on your portfolio, show it to any future employers. Even if you are employed, it's something cool to show off to others. This is really something that you can use as the great start of an application or even a business. There's so much potential here with what we've accomplished, and definitely don't let it go to waste. You want to make the most out of everything that we've gained in this process. And this is the whole idea behind React 12 and doing these different projects, is that there's so much potential for each of these. There's so many places you can take it. And what's great about this series, and why I really hope that you join the next one, is because you can use all these same skills that we've developed here. And it's taken so much time to develop these skills, and we put so much work into this, that we're going to use this, we're going to immediately use this to create future projects. This isn't just a one and done situation. We're going to use all of these different tools that we've learned, Material UI, of course, all the React skills and JavaScript skills that we've learned along the way, Apollo, Hasura, all of this stuff is going to help us power even more applications. And I think above all, it's just a lot of fun to be making all of this. So something else about this app is that you can see there's a lot of things that we haven't filled out. You can certainly use the skills that we've gained so far to make this a full-fledged Instagram application. I feel like I would be doing you a disservice if I was giving you everything, every little bit that I could in terms of building Instagram. Of course, there are some parts of it that are idiosyncratic that I believed were the best choice in terms of teaching you something, different approaches that I believed were best. But definitely, if you want to see this done to completion or you want to fill this out further, go for it. I'd love to see what you accomplish if you take it even further, to see other features filled out. Really, the sky's the limit. So thanks again so much for taking this course. I can't wait to see you in the next one. And congratulations for a job well done.